Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our roundtable discussion about empowering data management, data ops, for DBAs through better tooling. Joining me today is Megan Longoria. Hi, Megan.
Hello.
And folks, I just want to express a little bit of gratitude. I appreciate you spending time with us. And I know you have a lot of other things to do that are very important. So I'm glad that you're here and I appreciate it. The gist of our session today is that DBAs have to do a lot of things, and our job is changing quite a lot over time. In fact, we now have even new positions that in the old days might have had a DBA title, but now have new titles, things like data engineer. And so we're going to talk about data governance, metadata management, different issues of data integration that are significant for DBAs and other members of the data management staff at your enterprise, and hopefully give you a good idea of a successful trajectory of moving from maybe a more chaotic situation today into a much more controlled and well managed environment where things are predictable and stable. And this is something that Megan is a master of. So I'm really excited to have you here with us and share your lessons learned and experiences, Megan.
Thank you.
So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kevin Kline. I'm a longtime kind of fixture in the SQL Server world, in the wider database world, and I'm active on Twitter and on LinkedIn at KE Kline. And my email address is kevin.kline@solarwinds.com. I'd love for you to reach out to me and we can connect. I've been doing this for a long time, so I've written a lot over the years and speak a lot and do those sorts of things. Megan, why don't you take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Um, my name is Megan Longoria. I work for a company called Denny Cherry and Associates, and we're a consulting company focused on Azure and SQL Server and Power BI. My job is kind of part DBA, part data engineer, and part data analyst. I do bits and pieces of basically the entire stack there for various clients. But I've been doing kind of the what we call business intelligence or data analytics for the last not quite 15 years now.
Mm, gosh, I still think of when you and I first met, and at that time you had experience in a single digit. I don't remember exactly what it is, and so that number is still fixed in my mind that you're like really fresh to the industry. So not true.
No, but it is Kevin's fault that I am a consultant because I talked to Kevin at a SQL Saturday speaker dinner, and I was really thinking about what I wanted in my job and my career. And I was kind of feeling like I needed something new. And so, some things you said to me, Kevin, actually, I went from that SQL Saturday dinner to a DataBiz conference in Oregon, came back, quit my job, and started with a consulting company shortly after that.
Oh, wow. That is very uplifting to my heart. Thank you for sharing that little story. I really appreciate that. So, like you said, you've got such a broad base of experience in our world as a data professional. Where did you start with um, moving from just the strictly database administration sorts of duties, like making sure your databases were properly cared for with their preventative maintenance and all the firefighting and troubleshooting that comes with being a DBA. When did you start moving from that towards the data visualization and reporting and dashboarding and that kind of activities in your career?
I was on a team that was actually embedded in a business unit rather than being considered IT. And when you do that, you do whatever needs to be done to help that business group succeed. And because I was with finance and sales operations at the time, people were trying to get views of their profit and loss statements by little internal groups within the company. And what happens is something gets co-sold. And so two different groups want to claim credit for the sale, or a product got logged slightly incorrectly in the product catalog. And so the revenue is not showing up in the right spot. So I spent tons and tons of time helping people find their data. It's not like it didn't make it into the system, it just wasn't quite right.
Mm.
And so we had back in the day analysis services, SSIS, and then a SQL server. And we had a bigger, larger corporate data warehouse. That was an Oracle data warehouse. But it ended up that we got our data so clean and so trusted that the enterprise data warehouse pulled from us instead of us being a data mart pulling from them.
Wow. So Shadow IT kind of rose above there.
Yeah, we worked with the data warehouse team, so it was kind of blessed shadow IT.
I
But
gotcha.
yeah, I was technically shadow IT in my first job.
Gotcha. You weren't quite renegades out there.
Nope.
Yeah, that's cool. And so, tell me a little bit more about that whole aspect of figuring out where all the pertinent data was. How did you go about that sort of thing?
There were a lot of pivot tables involved in Excel, to be
Yes.
really honest. That's kind
Uh,
of where we started.
right.
Once we kind of figured out, oh, this thing happens a lot, or this is usually what's going on, somebody's misclassified this, or we actually had to make up new classifications and new groupings to get the P&Ls just right for how people wanted to see it because it didn't match the business unit structure necessarily. And so then we started having to build UIs that people needed to enter data there to be able to say, oh, I'm grouping it this way, or the financial planning team needed somebody to make a tool that could both capture data but also lock it. Like, yes, we've decided this is the forecast. You can't mess with it anymore. And so we got kind of far into that. And that was a big portion of our jobs in the beginning, just getting that working.
Right, right. Deciding what's true and what you want to rely on. Ex- yeah, exactly. It's a massive issue. Um, and in that scenario, did you have a situation where maybe all the data you needed wasn't in house? Did you ever have to go outside of, say, your Oracle sources, and you had to maybe pull from other data marts or other data sources or even an external data source?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we tried to do at that company was have this, 360-degree view of a client. So we would make client-centric dashboards about, at the time, what products they had, what versions they were on, and make sure they weren't too far behind, who their salesperson was. And it was a large company, but there were definite data silos. So I had access to the corporate data warehouse, but the stuff I really wanted was in the managed services group. And so we had
Ah,
to go over
yeah.
to them and negotiate access to their database. And sometimes people just send us flat files. Sometimes we would literally have to call someone and say, hey, can you go enter this into the sales application so that we can pull this data? We would just make up new fields for people to store this information in because a lot of it was actually qualitative instead of quantitative.
I see.
So we just needed places to put them in some cases. And in other cases, it was we're pulling version numbers and last logins and all that from actual systems, so from real databases.
And so was all of that also managed through things like Excel spreadsheets? I know Power BI has some cool features, but I'm not sure if, all of the enterprise Power BI kind of features had come out yet. And so,
Power
yeah,
BI didn't exist back then.
okay, all right. That helps us scope it in. So probably was Excel, right?
Some of it was because Excel is just a really good interface
Yeah.
for checking data. I mean, it
Hmm.
really honestly is, but it was never copy and paste your data. It was connect to analysis services or a SQL server or something like that and write formulas to compare the data. We also did that with reports, with reporting services sometimes, but when you work with finance people, they tend to like Excel better. So that's kind of where we started.
Right. I'm sure there were plenty of those people who looked at a report and probably said, "Oh, this is nice, but now I want to play with this data," which meant,
Hmm.
you know, giving them a button that could save it as an Excel file or a CSV file or something like that. So yeah, that of course makes complete sense. Um, so you're building this big project and it's taking a lot of work. How did you keep control of everything and know where everything was, or was that still kind of just ad hoc?
I mean, it was part of that was a big goal of the project. I think that organization in particular decided, maybe we're probably never going to get all of this data in an enterprise data warehouse. Maybe a more distributed approach is the answer. And so it was a good portion of that was just cataloging, where does everything live?
Oh
Who
boy.
has this? Who owns this? Who can actually give us permission? And who do we contact if we think the data is wrong? Because once we got it, it didn't mean that was the end of the story. We'd get it
Right.
and we'd go, no, 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 no. I know this person is on version X, but this is showing,
Something
Z.
correct, right? Yeah. Wow. That's intriguing to me because I find in the 2020s now that for so many years we had spent all of our time and effort figuring out how to administrate our databases and how to manage that data. But when we start to examine projects like your own, what we realize is that's not the end of the story. You actually also need to know how to turn data into information. And that's not easy. It's not just, select star from a bunch of tables. You've got to do a ton of work to make that happen. So tell me a little bit more about that. Did people talk about this concept of data governance, or like a corporate data dictionary, or was it more in language that the business people understood and more to meet their kinds of goals rather than say a more centralized IT structure?
I'd say it was both. And that's
Mm,
what you probably would see in any organization, especially today. There's the IT side of it, but IT can't run data governance. They can't run master data management by themselves either. You have to have business stakeholders who are kind of at the, director-ish level to say that this is important and people should spend time on it. And then you have to have actual stewards to know that data who could tell you, oh, this is the thing that's wrong. We classified this incorrectly.
mm, very interesting. So a slight sidebar discussion, but what do you think of all this talk about, data warehouses were spectacularly hyped, in the aughts, the 2000s and so forth. And then we have data marts, as you mentioned, which are kind of a data warehouse, but a smaller scope. And then we have people talking about data lakes as well. Um, and of course, good old databases we've had forever. Where does this kind of buzzword soup, what does it mean to you when you hear people talking about these things?
To me, we are adopting polyglot persistence in a more helpful way. If you haven't heard that term before, we're basically saying, I'm going to use the storage that makes the most sense for the purpose. So, in my world, that happened kind of early on with analysis services. We stored it differently than we did our average database because it facilitated the reporting and the analytics that we wanted. But just blow that up times a billion and see where it goes, and you end up with all of your data lakes and data lake houses and data marts and different kinds of analytical databases that sit on top of your relational databases. So it's more like we're finally realizing your data warehouse cannot be your everything. Now, how do we, what's our stack look like? And it may include a data warehouse,
Hmm.
but there's more to it than that. So
Uh,
I actually think data lakes are a great first step if all you have is a data warehouse, because they are potentially immediately useful to people just as an archive or a staging area. And then you can start getting into, well, let me curate just a little bit of this data so that my data science type people can play around with it, because they tend to like flat files. And you don't necessarily want to create a whole ETL process for an experiment. They got to, work through it and then see if it has value before you encode it in your normal processes. So data lakes work really well for that type of thing. The I just need a place to play, but a place to access some of that source data, because when you build a data warehouse, whether you want to admit it or not, you have decided how it will be analyzed
mhm.
based on your design of your facts and dimensions.
Sure.
Because if your fact doesn't link to one of these dimensions, you can't analyze by that. So we've already made decisions through the transformation process. Your data lake can let people back up and go, let me get at the raw data and see what else I can relate this to.
Okay. So for our audience who really haven't studied much of the differences between data lakes and data warehouses, that sounds like that's a pretty significant dividing line between one and the other. What are some of the other kind of hallmarks of the sweet spot for data warehouses as opposed to the sweet spot of data lakes. Every tool typically is suited to a specific kind of purpose. And so, how do you divvy those two up?
I think it depends, one, on what your sources and destinations are that need that kind of data. But a lot of people do their data governance, their master data management processes after it lands in the data lake. So it's not, you don't have to do it this way, but it's not uncommon to just have your raw data land in the data lake, stage it, and then process it to put it in your data warehouse. And when you put it in your data warehouse, you're answering common, mostly known business questions. So it may not, I mean, you may find other uses for that data, but because of the way that we have structured it, we've made decisions about how you can and cannot analyze it. And if we want to change that, we can, but it means we're going to make new tables or add columns and rewrite ETL to do what we want it to do.
Right.
So when you need things standardized, that should definitely be in your data warehouse. There
Mm.
are still arguments about whether that should be moved back to the data lake, because if you move it back, potentially more applications could reference it. And
Mm.
that's where that kind of, I'll say, new-ish trend of the lake houses. People are building their quote data warehouses in their lakes now.
I haven't even heard that term, and I thought I was staying on top of it pretty well too. So, what keeps a data lake from turning into a data swamp?
Organization and communication,
Mm, mhm, mhm.
flat out. Like, your folders need to be highly organized. You need to be very disciplined about what you allow to go where. So typically, you can find a billion articles about zones in a data lake. And I've mentioned a few of them. So there's raw, which is where we just download data as is. Staging is where we're landing it in preparation for sending it somewhere else. You may have a curated zone where we've done a little bit of work, like maybe you have customer data, and so you want a good, solid view of the customer in your data lake. There's usually a user upload zone, an experimentation or data science zone, and there are up to maybe 10 pretty common zones.
Oh, okay.
So you have to be very disciplined about not letting something into curated that isn't actually curated. You have to be very disciplined about having a special folder for sensitive data.
Of course, yeah.
So, if we've got PII in there, or financial information, and you're a publicly traded company, you don't just throw it in your data lake. You throw it in your data lake and make sure you have properly secured it, that because your data is probably in multiple zones, so that every zone that it's in, and whether or not it's secured as far as who can get to it, if it's protected as far as some kind of extra encryption. All the things we do in a database are now applying to data lakes as well, depending on how much of your data and how transformed your data is as you store it in the data lake.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. Now, I had also heard that some people would differentiate a data warehouse from a data lake in some cases by the kind of data that was stored in there. So typically, and what they were saying to me was that with your data warehouse, you're still going to have this idea of, tables and rows, you've got facts and dimensions. But with a data lake, you might also have Parquet files, you might have MP4 files, hopefully with some categories assigned to them so that you can tell, what this data was representative of. Would you agree with that kind of dividing line between the two?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty common way to differentiate that you have highly structured data in your data warehouse,
Hmm.
and maybe I don't really believe in saying unstructured, but semi-structured data, because
Sure.
everything has somewhat of a structure.
Right.
Semi-structured data is much better stored in your data lake. Images, put them in your data lake. They don't need to live in your data warehouse. You could have a link and
Right.
link back, but that's kind of that polyglot persistence thing of, hey, we realize we don't need images or files in our database. We could just put them in a better place to store them and access them there. So I do agree with that. I think there's always, a few exceptions here and there where it makes sense, but largely, yeah, you're going to have structured data in your data warehouse.
And if you're a cloud company or you're moving your internal databases to the cloud, that also makes a lot of sense too, because when you go to that really cheap block level storage for things like files, maybe you're a company that has acoustic data or you have video data. That's a lot cheaper to store that on that block level S3 storage on Amazon or Azure Blob Storage in Azure than it is in the database, which is a good deal pricier.
Absolutely.
So you had some great lessons here in this, and I'm sure in some other projects. And I wonder, was there a particular moment or a particular set of circumstances that really set you on a path to where you knew that, or your team knew that, hey, we need to start governing this better? Anything like that happen?
I've had multiple instances of that. The one that comes to mind the most is it was actually my job for a little bit in a quarterly sales meeting to fact check other people's data. So
Ah,
people would come prepared to say, well, my part of the sales organization did whatever, $8 million or something, and here's the profit off of it, and blah, blah. Except they had their own business analysts do that, which is fine. But we were the authoritative source of the sales data. And so sometimes numbers just got fudged.
mm-hmm,
And so they would actually they would send us stuff as it was passed out to them in the meeting, and we would fact check while they were presenting so that when it came question time, our executives would be like, well, what about that was the most extreme example, but it
yeah,
never fails to go into a financial meeting and three people have three different numbers. That's so common. If your organization is like that, you are not alone at all.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's very common, and it technology alone cannot solve that.
Well, and that's really interesting too. I guess, in my experiences, it's always a matter of scale. So, like, if the finance team says, "Oh, it's $32,000," but the sales team, being more optimistic, say it's 33 and change, that's not bad. But if the sales team comes in and says, "No, it's 60,000," now we got to figure some stuff out, because this is the scale is so much different between the one that's just 1% more and the one that's double.
Yeah, I actually had a job where they told me if we were off by less than $1,000, then it's not worth my time to look into it.
Sure, it's a rounding error. Let's go. Let's keep going.
Hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. um, what was first for you guys? And as you mentioned, you've done this multiple times at different places, so maybe the answer, well, the technical answer to all questions is always it depends, right? But what was first for you in terms of the many different kinds of aspects of data governance? There's the corporate data dictionary, there's master data management, there's information management lifecycle. There's quite a bringing in data stewards. There's quite a few different entry points to start thinking about things from a data governance perspective. Was there a pattern, or did it just vary greatly from different customer and project uh, to the other?
I think today it might be a little more varied, but I would say most people kind of have this concept of master data management. They run into it first because there's some entity that's really important to your organization, and you can't agree on, like, is this one customer or is this two customers because they come from three different systems? How do I merge them together? Or what region is this customer really in today? Did everybody's system get updated? So I use customer because it's pretty common, but it could be anything. It could be your chart of accounts, it could be your product catalog, is also really common, where you just have a lot of conflicting sources. And so what tends to happen first is we go, okay, that system over there is the system of record. If it's not in that system, it doesn't count. But then we realize, well, one, that's never going to happen. And two, um, we need a more nuanced view. So then you start getting into master data management of, okay, so this is the product category when we're talking about sales and marketing. But this is the product category when we're talking about finance and operations. And maybe they are legitimately different.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we need to not call them both product category, or maybe we just call them the sales product category and the operational product category.
Yeah.
And you have to have all those conversations. And that's typically what I see first, because everyone even in smaller companies, you run into that. People are keeping their own lists somewhere and their lists conflict. So it's a pretty common issue no matter the size or industry. And that's what I tend to see people talk about first. Now, they've probably hit all of that all over the place, but that's the one where people go, I think I might be able to fix this with some combination of process and technology.
Gotcha. And you mentioned another really important kind of key phrase that some of our customers might not know too much about, which is system of record. Talk a little bit about the significance of assessing what you have on hand, maybe competing kinds of similar systems, and then designating one of those as the system of record. What does that mean?
Sure. So when I say system of record, I mean the approved source for this data set, or this, even just this field. So if we use the customer table example, maybe the customer ID comes from your financial billing system, but the customer region comes from a sales system, from your CRM. So it can really be down to the column. But it means that someone who has ownership and decision making power over how we use this data in the organization has said, this is the source that I trust for this record. And it
Right.
could be by column, it could be by table, it could be 6 different source systems, or you could just say, you know what, anything customer related comes from here.
Got it.
So
Yeah.
every organization is going to be a little different in what they choose as their system of record, and what they choose as far as, is it the whole table or the whole column, or all data sets related to a subject come from this source. None of it's wrong. It's just what works best for your business and what's easily communicated and maintained.
Well, let's take that concept a little bit further, because one of the things that I discovered a long time ago when I worked for the government as a contractor for the Department of Defense was that there are all of these external data sets that you can purchase typically. For example, a DUNS number. So you can buy from, I'm not sure if it's a government organization or maybe even Dun and Bradstreet, but it's a reference library of all kinds of customers, I'm sorry, all kinds of business entities that are registered to do business with the government. Um, Similarly, there are reference data sets for all kinds of things, like every postal code in the world, right? So if you wanted all the zip codes in the USA and postal codes in Canada, you don't have to create that data set yourself. Uh, what have you seen in terms of current or former customers of your own, in terms of accelerating the kind of data quality, maybe amplifying your data integration efforts by using these external data sets?
I think the most common external data sets are related to geography, as far
Mm,
as what I've seen.
hmm
Everybody wants either postal codes, or they have addresses and they want longitude and latitude. So they just geocode things. They send it to like a Melissa data or something like that to be able to get information back. But I've also seen, and especially when you get on the data viz side, there are reference layers for maps that you can purchase. So it may be, hey, you're plotting customers or businesses, but you want to see what the population is in that area, or the median income by
Yeah.
statistical area,
hmm
MSA.
Right. Census data, for example, might be.
Yep.
You have a chain of restaurants that all have beautiful patios, so you want to see where is it warm enough for us to do this and still
Yep.
make a good go of it. That's a really good point, and I appreciate you bringing that up. We also know that in certain industries, there are very important sorts of reference data. Like in the medical industry, they have the whole concept of coding, right? You code each kind of visit you have to a medical professional in some way, and that determines all kinds of information around billing and how much you can charge for things. Um, in your experience with moving that data around, maybe from these external sources or from different parts of the organization itself, different business silos, perhaps. Um, What are some of the kind of tips or tricks that you might have seen in terms of accelerating that and amplifying your ability to get those kind of data movements done quickly?
The first thing I can think of is find a connector and buy it instead of writing your own custom code. I've done it both ways, and I can tell you, even if you have, C# developers on hand who can write something to connect to an API or to another data source that requires code, it's, I won't say always or never, but it's almost never worth it to do it yourself if you can pay $100 to get a tried and true method from someone else.
Of course, we at SolarWinds, there's a bit of bias there since we make products like Task Factory and Database Mapper to keep track to help with your data governance and data lineage. Um, so yeah, it's like whether you make your own paper or whether you buy it off the shelf, right? I mean, paper is cheap and easy, and making paper is not. So that definitely is great advice. Another advice I would just offer to everyone, as a longtime DBA, think of yourself like an artisan. If you were a master glass blower or a master wood carver or any kind of those artistic yet crafty sort of skills, you're not going to walk into that job without any tools at all. And so I think that's one of the primary focuses I have in all of my webinars about how to troubleshoot IO or something like that is you will always have at least Management Studio, right? So here's some queries that you need to know if you have nothing but Management Studio. But if you want to be really productive, then use the tools that are specially built to that purpose to accelerate and amplify your ability to get things done. So well, here's just kind of a broad question for you uh, what we have in the Microsoft stack in terms of data movement. We've got SQL Server integration services, and then we have some people who use SQL Server integration services with something like BIML, the BI markup language, which enables you to script and automate a lot of that. And then we have Azure Data Factory. Um, is your choice as to which to use pretty much decided entirely by where the bulk of your data resources are? Or is it possible that somebody who is largely on premises might use something like Azure Data Factory to move data around? You have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would say if you're largely on premises, you're probably going to stick with SSIS. One of the reasons is actually just a technical thing.
Hmm.
Data Factory requires what's called a self hosted integration runtime to
Yes.
connect to your on premises data. So if you have multiple networks, you would have to move your data to the cloud and then back down because that runtime has to be able to talk to every source and destination there. So it's
Ah,
pretty easy to go on-prem to cloud or cloud to on-prem, but if you're trying to stay entirely on-prem, it I guess if everything could talk to everything, and if everything can talk to everything, we need to have a conversation about your network, and how it's probably not real secure. Then maybe you could try to force it in there, but I really think most people on-prem are probably good with just SSIS. The other piece is how you want to do your transformation. SSIS is actually pretty good about quick transformations for small amounts of data. When you transform your data in Azure Data Factory, if you use the built in things, what you're doing is spinning up a Spark cluster behind the scenes.
no
Now,
kidding.
if you're spinning up, and depending on whether you're using it in Synapse or standalone Data Factory, it's either Databricks or Microsoft's own flavor of Spark.
Right.
But it's you're spinning up, and I guess you could make the world's smallest, cluster, but you're basically using big data tools that have a spin up cost. And so if you did that for 100 rows of data, you need to go, I'm not saying it's always more expensive, but you need to go look at price. Was it worth it to have that Spark cluster up for 15 minutes? And you probably made it more than that so that it would be up and ready before you started, so you didn't have to wait 5 minutes for it to be warmed up. So there's just some different considerations there. I'm not knocking it; it works, great in a lot of cases. But right now, things like that, they work for small data, but they're not always cost effective or as fast. You can't spin it up and spin it down really quickly.
Hmm.
And so you have to decide what fits your workload
Right.
better.
Right.
But you could use both too. You could do, data movement because the copy activity in Data Factory is really good. And you could still, if you have a bunch of small data that just needs some, conditional columns and things like that, you could also try, you can call an SSIS package from Data Factory. So there's nothing to say you have to choose one or the other. You just need to keep in mind, what it is you're trying to do, the size of your data, and the latency that's allowed in your process.
Sure. Sure. That makes complete sense. So, what I'd like to do now is to talk a little bit about a couple of our products and how they help solve some of the big issues that you have highlighted throughout this many years of experience that you've accumulated, and kind of point to how our different products help solve that problem and accelerate your ability to get to a good position with those. And for these particular sets of video, we're going to ask John Moore, one of our solutions engineers on house, to show us each of these different products and how they relate to what we're working on. So the first is we have Task Factory, which, as you mentioned, Megan, is a big collection of different kinds of, I guess you could call them components or cartridges or modules, however you like to use that term. I guess the term in SSIS is component, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, yay, I got it right. I'm not an SSIS person. Yeah. So for example, if you need to extract data from Salesforce, you want to bring it in to be analyzed by your business analyst. It could take a long time for you using the API to do that, or you could just click a few buttons in Task Factory, start making use of it immediately. So let's take a look at that. And so now I'd like to introduce my colleague, John Moore. John is going to take us through some of the data ops products that will help make your life better. John?
Thank you, Kevin. Hey, everyone. I'm John Moore, Solutions Engineer with SolarWinds. Been working with these products for a couple of years now on a support capacity, and now I'm a solutions engineer. So I'll get the fun job of getting to show off these products to you today. Now, the first one that I wanted to show here is going to be SolarWinds Database Mapper. Now, this tool is designed to do a couple of things very well within a pretty darn competitive budget here. Now, the first thing that it's going to be able to do is metadata documentation. So this documentation here, what it's able to do out of the box is to give you fully granular metadata documentation for multiple targets. So not just SQL Server databases, you're also going to get the instance level of documentation. And this goes all the way down into tables, columns, right? Indexes, foreign keys. We're even able to populate code from objects. So, as an example here, if we're trying to take a look at our stored procedures, just a simple matter of here, if I click on the header, we'll get a summary of all of our stored procedures. And then we could go into an individual stored procedure and see the code that runs within that stored procedure. So this documentation, right, fully customizable as well. If it's showing you too much information, you can tweak this and cut it down a bit so that it's only showing the documentation that's important to those who are reading this, right? Whether you've got some data architects, data catalogers, or developers, DBAs, that's kind of the whole point behind the customization in this tool, being able to show them what's important to the consumer. Now, we do even have the ability to add customized notations into this documentation, and it's pretty darn robust here. We do support multiple data types. So when you are deciding how you want to add these notations, we're enabling you with the most efficient methods possible. Now, right over here as well, if I'll just quickly show you this grid view here for data dictionary, this is one of multiple ways that you can insert values into your documentation. So we'll jump right over here to my live environment, and here we go. So to start inserting these values, these customized notations, It's just a simple matter of drilling into this navigation tree. And then wherever I have decided to insert these customized notations, they're going to show up right here in these various fields. Like I mentioned, there's different data types, whether you just want to do some text data fields and type in some notations of some kind, or if you want to use a date time widget, a pick list, or even a drop down data type. So, if you want to flag things for data sensitivity or classification, right? So pretty cool tool, right? You make changes, you save it, those changes are immediately visible to everybody. So that's kind of just a general quick overview summary of the documentation. There's some other really cool features in there too, Kevin, like the database comparison feature, right? So there's a lot more to this than I have time to show you today.
Right.
But what I'll go ahead and jump into next is going to be our lineage feature here. And this is a very big differentiator for us and what this tool can provide to you as an organization. So the intent of the Lineage tool is to be able to enable you to not only explore the dependencies in your environment, and that does include cross-technology dependencies, by the way. So maybe you've got stored procedures or you've got agent jobs, you name it. This tool is able to display that, and that includes across different technologies. So as you can see here, if I zoom in a little bit, we've got a bunch of different color-coded objects. We've got analysis services. We've got SQL Server objects here. We can even show you reporting services, Power BI objects, including integration services packages. So, this is just a couple of the targets that we support here. There's a whole lot more out there as well, which are, I'll just very quickly show you here from this drop down on our target list here. And everyone out there watching this can take a look at this or check out our documentation and see what we can include in these lineage diagrams. But the real power of this lineage tool comes in the ability to apply filters. So that way I'm not seeing just all the connections that exist under the sun. I can tell this tool, hey, maybe I'm a DBA, right? And I want to see SQL Server objects only for my keys and my object references. So to do that, all I got to do, Kevin, is uncheck this data lineage button. And now I'm only going to see keys, right? As well as object references with this little cog icon right here. And I could further clean this up and say, maybe because I am a DBA, we're seeing analysis services in this result set. We're seeing Power BI objects. I want to get rid of those because they're not in my purview. It's not my job to manage those, right?
Sure.
So I could come to this filter on the top right corner, the big blue button, and it's just a technology-based filter, pretty straightforward. I can just uncheck analysis services, and when I hit apply here, it's no longer going to show up in my result set. So that's just one of the filters. There's any number of filter combinations we can use here as well. Like if I'm trying to trace these where maybe for the city table, Kevin, let's say I know that there's sensitive customer data in the city table, and I want to find out what other applications are using that sensitive data. So to do that, we would want to enable data lineage here because that's showing us where data is moving between objects, and we'll disable object dependencies, and then we'll disable key dependencies here as well. Now what we're left with are both incoming and outgoing data lineage dependencies. So we could further specify this and say, well, instead of seeing both incoming and outgoing, let's only see outgoing data lineage dependencies. And now, when I extend these objects, right, I can very quickly start to get an understanding of what other applications are using that data, right? And as you can see, it doesn't stop at SQL. We're able to dig through this metadata and show you any other dependencies, whether that's analysis services, integration services, or any of our other supported target types. So, it's a pretty darn powerful tool. Very easy to use as well, right? So,
so if you were a DBA in this example, and let's say you needed to make the city name column you need to increase it 50 more characters in size, you can see all the other systems that it would touch where you'd need to make that change as well.
Exactly. So
Yeah,
pretty
very
darn
nice.
powerful. Just a couple of clicks, we found that out. So
Yeah,
pretty
that's
nice.
super cool. Yeah, it is.
So cool. That's kind of a good, very quick, general summary, Kevin, of database mapper. There's a lot of little things I just don't have time to chat about right now due to our time constraints.
Folks, notice that John is actually referencing this from a browser, and that is a public demo that you can play with and tinker with hands-on right now. Demo.document.
Exactly.
Yeah, .century1.com. So avail yourself of that resource. Of course, we'd be delighted to get you a download trial that you could execute on premises, but you are able to start right away. So, as you said, let's take a look now at Task Factory.
Yeah, sure. So Task Factory is an awesome tool set. So basically what this is going to be able to provide your organization is additional SSIS components. There's over 70 additional components. So the point being here is that we're providing to you a whole bunch of unique customization and configuration components. So these do range in application. We have unique functionality that just is not available in native SSIS. That's going to be things like our REST source and REST destination components. So if you're trying to pull data off of a REST API, or you're trying to push data to a REST API, we can do that with these REST source and REST destination components. We even have enhanced components. So features that already exist within native SSIS components, but we're able to do them much better, more efficiently, and provide more customization options. So one example of that is going to be the dimension merge SCD component. So if you're working with any kind of data warehousing and you've had to use the Microsoft component for solely changing dimension, you know how slow and how problematic that component can be. It's prone to breaking if you try to edit it after you've configured it. So we provide a replacement component for this that can process records much faster and more reliably. So it's not going to explode on you if you try to edit it after you've configured the thing.
Sure.
So we do have, even outside of this, a common theme with all of our components here is going to be the easy to use interface and the fact that we natively integrate into your native SSIS environment. The only thing that you have to do to make this work is to install Task Factory on your deployment servers and your development machines. Very simple to use. Beyond that, we're integrating fully into native functions. So if you're deploying to a catalog and you're feeding in some variables or an environment or something like that, we're fully integrating with all those native processes. And the interface in these components is another huge benefit here. So very simply put, it's a very easy to work with interface. The point of this is so that you don't have to jump through hoops to learn how to use our tools. We're making this as simple as possible. We're including tool tips as well. So we even have really great documentation out there as well with full sets of videos for each one of these SSIS components. So if you're not really sure where to start, right, we've got a lot of resources available for you, not to mention our support department as well. So if you ever have any kind of configuration problems or upgrade issues, anything like that at all, right, we've got a full support team there to back you up here.
Right. So, in case you as our attendees didn't notice, you can see in the Solution Explorer on the right-hand side that there's pre-built connectors for lots and lots of different services. So if you're part of the marketing team, we've got things like Marketo, and you want to pull in Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter for sentiment analysis or different things like that. Those things all take a long time to construct by yourself. And as John mentioned, many times they're brittle. They break really easily. You take all this time to troubleshoot and performance tune them. And months later, it still may not be perfect. Whereas with these different packages that are already pre-built for you, they're already ready to go. They're fully tuned. They're fully optimized. So you can get some enormous acceleration in your ability to deploy applications and ETL pipelines using this set of tools.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, because speed is the name of the game and ease of use is the name of the game when it comes to Task Factory. We're trying to make this as simple and easy for you as possible, limit the amount of development time, limit the amount of management for these components that is required. Like Kevin said, if you're building this through custom components, script tasks or anything like that, great, you can do that. But what happens if your expertise leaves and you no longer have someone who can update those things for you, right? So that's another clear benefit here with our tool set here as well. And like we mentioned, it is a full gambit of what it can help you facilitate. So lots of different really cool features within this tool set here.
So folks, I want to remind you, if you are in a high performance environment or you don't have enough time to get everything developed that you want to in terms of data flow pipelines, then this is the product for you. And also, kind of like to brag on the fact that we eat our own dog food, as Microsoft uses that term, we use this ourselves. So we build lots of our dashboards, pull in analytics from Google Analytics, from Salesforce, and so many of these other different components. Mm-hmm. And so we're not only creators of this product, we're also users and are very, very happy with what it does for us. So, John, there was one other useful set of tools we were going to talk about, and this set of tools is free. So let's take a look at Dba Express.
Sure, happy to. So yeah, we'll take a quick look here at it. This is Dba Express, and this is actually a free tool. Now, the purpose of this tool and what it's going to allow you to do are a couple things that are DBA related. So as an example here, if I'm trying to compare the schema between a source and a target database, or if I'm also wanting to do a comparison for data between a source and a target database, that's going to be one of the first things that this tool can do, as you can see here. So first thing I'm going to show you here, this is our Schema Inspector. Now, what's pretty darn neat about this tool is that you can point it to your source or your target. You can also take a snapshot. So you can have a point in time reference of a database and use that as a later reference. So, let's say I've got a new application database and I want to deploy that to my production instance, right? I could actually use this tool, use schema compare, point it to the development database and the production target, and it will then ask me, how do I want to synchronize this between the source and the target? So I can come through this list, drill down in each one of those bullet points and decide what do I want to synchronize and what do I not want to synchronize, right? Maybe some user-based permissions. Those are things we're probably not going to want to sync between the dev environment and the production environment. So that's going to be the first use case here with DBA Express. The other tool that you can do here as well is a data inspector as well. So similar concept to the schema compare, but now we can actually compare data between a source and a target. Now, we can choose as well, how do we want to synchronize this? By the way, Kevin, if I want to run the sync statement directly through this application, I can do that, and it's going to use my permissions and commit that update to synchronize the source and the target. Or if I want to just generate a SQL script and use that later, that's something I could do as well. So we don't have to commit the action immediately, right? We can just generate the script, leave that somewhere, and then use it when we're ready to. You can also automate this tool through command line. So if you want to, automate that snapshot process, right? Take a schema snapshot of your production server or your development server and automate that process. It's just a simple matter of configuring this through whatever application you like to use with command line, like a PowerShell script or Windows Task Scheduler or anything else that you could think of. So pretty powerful tool, I'd say. And it's, how much does it cost, Kevin?
This one's free.
This one's free. So yes, you don't have to pay anything to use this thing, y'all. You just got to come to the website and fill out a little info sheet for it, and it's going to get you the download link. So
You know, I was talking with a customer a while ago about the difficulties they were having using a data transformation tool. It was not SSIS. It was a kind of open source sort of tool. And they used Dba Express. They would take a snapshot of the schema and the data every time they changed the transformation, because at one point they'd experienced a situation where they don't know when, but something happened, and now certain fields were blank when they shouldn't be. They didn't have a lot of debugging or auditing built into the transformation tool. So this enabled them to know at exactly what point when they made a change that it had been introduced, the problem. So it gave them a way to see when there were regressions. Yeah.
Perfect. And yeah, you could even just use this tool to see the differences too, right? If you're just trying to do a little bit of analysis. So you don't have to commit action. That's a final step in the tool. So you could use this to just analyze. And then if you do want to commit a synchronization, great. We can do that for you. So,
sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's excellent stuff, John. Thank you so much for your time. And I appreciate you showing all.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Yeah.
Sure thing.
Megan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So what's next for you? Are you going to be speaking anywhere anytime soon? Are you going to, well, I'm going to guess you're probably not traveling so much, but how about in the virtual world? Will we see you online?
Absolutely. I'm doing a lot of user groups right now, but one of my larger initiatives that started this year is continuing on, and it's called Workout Wednesday for Power BI. So it's an initiative to help people learn how to visualize data in Power BI. Power BI has that cool tabular engine underneath, and people get really into the DAX, but what about how we actually visualize things? So every week we do a challenge, and lately we've had kind of a theme for the month. This month happens to be mapping. So we're looking at all different kinds of maps that you can use in Power BI to visualize your data. So we're on week 41 right now. And 2021 was the first year we've done this. It started as a Tableau initiative, and they invited us to join them so that you can actually, try both tools if you want. But I think just like we have data governance, there are rules for data visualization as well that maybe don't get as much focus as administrative tasks, because a lot of us came from that DBA background and then got into data analysis. So I hope people will join us every week, and you can do them in whatever order and whatever time you want. They'll stay out there for forever. So feel free to check out Workout Wednesdays.
That sounds amazing. And just like you've said, I have seen so many situations where you're looking at a data visualization and your colleague next to you leans over and says, I'm not sure what they were trying to express here, but they clearly failed. Kevin raises his hand. Yeah, I probably used pie charts for all the wrong things. Well, that's great. And just like you said, it's a skill set that you need to learn. So I'm really excited to hear that is a resource you've made available to the community. On behalf of everyone at SolarWinds, I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you joining us. And Megan, thank you for your time. I know you're busy. You got a lot to do.
Thanks.
Folks, hope to see you soon. As you know, I do webcasts every 2 weeks or so, semi-monthly, as they say. So hope to see you on one of those sessions. And also follow me on Twitter at Klein. Megan, how about yourself?
My Twitter handle is mmarie.
Marie. All right, got it. Okay, folks, thanks for your time. See you in the next session that we do. Bye.